How's it going, everyone? And welcome once again to another episode of Animal Talk Podcast with me, Ryan Ferguson.
And me, Ayrton King. Hey Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Happy to be part of another podcast. And oh my word, how amazing was our previous podcast from last week? How inspiring and exciting. And yeah, it's just, I think last week was a really good one.
Yeah, still a little bit mind blown by that one. And every time I listen to a little segment of it or somebody talks to me about it, I still feel those goosebumps that I got before. So yeah, it was definitely a very, very interesting podcast and very cool to hear the passion and excitement for the animals and our industry.
Yes, indeed.
I would just like to mention that we are recording this podcast during the day, which is a little bit weird for both of us because we normally do most of our recordings in the evening. So you may hear some interesting sounds of our day lives in the background, but that's all part and parcel of it all.
Like Ryan's dog with a squeaky toy.
A squeaky toy or a whole bunch of hardy dolls flying over. That's going to be all possibilities. But also just to let everybody know, Ayrton and I do not sit down and prep for our podcasts and discuss what we're going to be talking about and how we're going to talk about it and how we're going to mention this or how we're going to speak to this guest. Everything that we do on our podcast is kind of pretty much off the cuff and it's off the conversation flow. So there's not a lot of preparation that is done from our side. We're kind of just sitting down and having a chat about a topic. So that is how we record our podcast.
Yeah, I know. I don't think I would have it any other way. It makes it just, conversational. And from the feedback that I've gotten from some of my friends and my colleagues is that when it's conversational, it's just easier to listen to. It sounds like you are part of a conversation as well. So that's why we like doing it this way.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So shall we tell our listeners what the topic is today?
They probably already know because they've read the title, but yes, we can.
Well, after last week's amazing podcast, we thought we would take a deeper dive into the world of target training animals, how to do it, some tips, and just give you guys some information about it from our experience doing it in our own industry. So that's what we're going to be chatting about today.
Cool. Sounds good. And because you are so excited about target training,
I'm really excited.
You're going to start.
Yay! Okay. So target training is often, I feel, overlooked. It is a really, really cool tool to have in your animal keeper's toolbox because there's a lot of applications that you can use target training for. And I think the biggest kind of misconception is that you have to have these really cool, fancy, expensive targets, but you don't. You can literally use your hand. You can use a ball that's stuck to a stick. I've used a ping pong ball before. So there's so many things you can use as targets. I've seen some other facilities, they literally use the PVC joins. If you work in an aquarium, you know what I'm talking about. They use that to target train some of their animals. So there's really, you can use absolutely anything that you have. And that's what I think makes it such a good resource, because you don't have to have these high-end targets. You can basically have a look at your facility, what you have, and you can use that. Targets also don't have to be a device like on a stick. It could also be a mat, for example, if you're wanting to train an animal that doesn't necessarily target the same way some other animals would. So like with stingrays, we could target train them to a stretcher, or with elephants, you could target train them to put their foot on a mat. So there's lots of different things that we can use. And I think for me, the most important thing with target training is once it's been implemented and once your animal is comfortable with the target, you can basically teach them so much from that. So from there, you can teach them like a shifting behavior. If you need the animal to move from one part of the exhibit into maybe a medical area or a behind the scenes area, you can teach them to go from one target to another target. So from A to B kind of situation. So maybe from one keeper to another. So there's so many applications from once the initial training's done that really can benefit not only the staff and make it easier to work with the animals, but also, I mean, for the animals, because getting them to move on their own voluntarily through this fun game that is target training is really just an amazing thing to see. Once the animals have it down, they know what you're asking of them, it really becomes like, from what I've seen with the animals that I've target trained, they actually have fun doing it, which I think is really, really important. So yeah, that's some intro info that I have for you.
I really like the fact that you said animals are having fun as part of the training, because it's so good for them to be completely connected to the training and involved in the training. And I think a lot of trainers kind of miss that, where they're so focused on wanting to get a behavior done, they're not even really looking at behaviors of the animal at the time, and understanding that it's completely focused in, and it might be getting distracted about some other things. So it's so important to have that animal connected and excited about the target training. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think, on a little side note here, I think what we have to think a lot about is when you are training animals and you are working with them in a training setting, something that's really important is maintaining that trust that you have with them. So never to force them, or, a lot of us, myself included, and it's something I've learned from, is often you've got an idea of what behavior you want, and the animal does it once or twice, and for some reason, I think it's just us being humans, we want to push it for a third time to see if we can get that desired behavior again. And then by doing that, we aren't necessarily setting the animal up for success. It becomes failure and then becomes frustration. So also just ending it.
Yeah, I think you've got to know limits, your limits and the animal's limits.
Always end it on a high note, maintain that trust. But also, if you're not having fun, I've had it in training sessions, especially with our penguins. If you're working with the animals and you've stopped having fun and it turns into frustration, rather end the training session on a high note with a behavior that the bird or animal is very comfortable with, and rather just end the session. Because if you're not having fun, they're most likely not having fun. And then what's the point? You know what I mean? So it's really important to just be like at peace, be relaxed in those training sessions, and then also just have a sense of humor. Like, look at what the animal's presenting to you. A lot of the times we'll ask for a behavior, or we'll be doing a training session, and the animal is actually pointing out our faults in maybe the cue that we've given them. We've given a cue that isn't clear enough, or we aren't necessarily, I mean, how many times have you been in a training session and you might think you focused on the animal, but you're actually going through your to-do list in your head? So thinking about, that environment, and if you're actually being present when you're doing that training session as well.
Yeah, whatever I'm going to be cooking for dinner, that's normally what's going through my head.
And it's really easy to just drift off, because a lot of the time we have a lot of stuff to do in our day. So don't feel bad if you do, but it's just really important to catch yourself doing it, and then ensure that you are addressing it with yourself in those moments. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. There's something very important about target training, and some people know it immediately, but some people don't. And I think it's quite an important part of target training to remember is the animal you are training might be scared of the target.
This is true.
And that is something that you have to work through, because you might be so goal set on getting this animal to be okay with this specific target, you may have to change it to something that is slightly better for that animal to be able to deal with. It might be really scared of a huge ball on the end of a stick. Maybe you need to try something smaller, or take the stick away and only have a mat, like you said, maybe a station, or there's different ways of checking it, but you can try. But a lot of people get so focused on it must be a red ball on the end of a stick and the animal must like it and must target to it. And that's where you hit those little pitfalls where maybe you're not getting those behaviors that you want, or you have an animal that you're training that just doesn't want to be part of it because it's nervous of this giant red ball on the end of a stick.
Yeah, I think that also goes to, like what we mentioned with finding things that you have in your facility already. So some of the training I've done with the penguins is not necessarily, when we talk about the mats and things, it's not necessarily target training, but you correctly said like a station area where you're asking them to go to. And what we found works with the penguins the best is the rocks that are on the exhibit. So basically each penguin has a rock that they need to go to, and that's something that's in their environment already, something that they're comfortable moving around, and it's something they're familiar with. So as much as there are really cool target designs out there, you don't necessarily have to have this extravagant, very flashy, showy target, because 10 times out of 10, your animal is actually going to not want to, interact with that because it's a foreign item that we've just introduced to them. So yeah, correctly mentioned there, Ryan, like looking for something that they're familiar with, works really well, something that's already in their environment. It might not necessarily be something that they see every day, but might be something, like I mentioned with the stingrays, a stretcher that we conditioning them to, but something that we've used with them. So look for those items that you can use as a target that, it doesn't also have to be a very large target, it can be something quite small, so that your animals are comfortable around it as well to get the best results.
Yeah, and I have a bit of an example of using a station and target at the same time kind of situation. Training a macaw for a voluntary nail trim. So what we would do is we would have a perch against the side of the enclosure, and we would train the macaw to station on the perch, which is close to the bars of the enclosure, and we'd obviously reinforce for it to stand on the station. And then we would ask the bird to target its foot onto a specific spot on that area of the bars of the enclosure. And for us to get that
That's so cool.
target of that foot there, we had to make some sort of visual display on those bars. So we'd wrap a piece of colored tape or something there just so that it stands out more than those bars, so that when we are training the behavior and getting the bird to lift the foot, we're directing the foot to that little target. And that is the perfect height or area where we can now have the bird's foot on the target, nails through the bars, and we're then able to Dremel the ends of those toenails. So that's kind of using both the station and the target in that training session.
I think that example just really sums up like the amount of cool stuff that you can do. So just, as we mentioned with target training, it's a really great tool to have, because there's so much, once that animal is used to targeting to a target, you can use it in so many applications, like the example that Ryan just gave. But I think now let's just break it down. Let's go right to the start. I think if you are listening to this and you've never target trained an animal before and you're thinking, oh, I'd like to do that, maybe let's just break it down for you into where to kind of begin. So obviously you've already found your target. Let's, for example, say with the only example I can think of using a hand target is we've had seals come through before that are going through rehabilitation and we need to move them. So you would use your hand like a closed fist, and then you would select a cue. So it could be a verbal cue. And what's really important is if there's more than one person training that target behavior, is to always ensure that you're using the exact same target. So if it's going to be like a closed fist, that everybody's on the same page as to what that looks like, that it isn't changed in any way. And then also that your verbal cue is the same. So you might use the word touch, you might use the word target, but everything in that, from how you are saying the word to how long it is kept the same. So you're not, if there's multiple people working with that animal, they're not saying target or target. versus target.
Target.
So it's really, really important that everybody's on the same page when you're training with animals, because that needs to be very much consistent. Otherwise, you're going to have confusion. If you're working with something that isn't as bitey as a seal, it's really what you're going to basically be doing is you're going to be taking your target, taking it close to the animal. You might want to just touch the target to the end of the animals, like with a penguin with their beak. We'll take the target, touch it to their beak, and then we'll either bridge or we would use our cue like target, and then we would reinforce. And when we're talking about, reinforcing with food, for example, it's really important your timing. I think with target training, timing is everything, because you are starting to build this association with that target, and you want to cue exactly when that target is touching, in this case, the penguin's beak. If you do it late, once it's left the bird's beak, you're actually asking for a completely different behavior. So, yeah, as I mentioned, timing is really everything. And then what you want to start doing is slowly, you can target that animal by touching the target to the animal's beak, saying your cue word, but then over time you'll start seeing that the animal will actually build that association by itself. You can leave the target just in front of the animal, give the cue word target, and you will see how that animal will start building that association and start bringing, in the penguin's case, its beak to that target by itself. And from there, you just want to, repeat that, ensure that you're reinforcing accordingly and on time, and that your bridge or your cue is also on time. And then from there, you can start moving the target further and further away. But I think also, build it really gradually, because you want to start it really short and easy. And like we mentioned, always setting the animal up for success, because if you start taking that target too far away, is the animal, going to know exactly what you're asking of it, because you've just started this training? So taking all of that into consideration, and I think that's always what I, think in the back of my mind is, the situation I've created in this training session, has the animal been set up for success? And that will always give you kind of a clear view of if you are going in the right direction or not. Ryan, is there anything you want to add?
I've been listening to it and I'm like, what can I say? He's like mentioning everything. No, I think you hit the nail on the head with everything. Again,
it's really difficult to explain it without being able to do it.
Yes, we should be doing this on a video. I think it's just also really important to reiterate how small approximations make a huge difference in building the behavior to the target or to the station. And also remember that you're going to use that target in future. So you always want that target to be as positive as you possibly can make it. Now, I'm saying target as in the target as in a ball on a stick, or the target as in a mat, as a station, or whatever. So when we were training birds for Free Flight Bird Show, we didn't really use much targets on a stick or anything like that, but we did use a lot of stations. And one of the things that we did train, especially for a corvid, which is a crow, is a crate that the bird is trained to go into has this AstroTurf mat on the bottom so they don't slip and slide on the plastic. And we used to take that mat out and put it on top of the crate and ask the crow to go on top of the crate and then reinforce that behavior on top of the crate. So this would then reinforce the crow for standing on the mat on top of the crate as a station. In this instance, if anything had to happen during the Free Flight Bird Show, you've got a gust of wind or a bird of prey come past and the crow gets blown off course and ends up in a tree somewhere in the facility somewhere else, you can then run off with the crate and the mat, put it on the floor below them, put the mat, and then call the bird down to the mat. So that's kind of a nice behavior, and always remembering that you want to make sure that target or that station is a positive space. Always needs to be a positive space.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Ryan mentioned in one of our previous podcasts when we talk about that animal's kind of bank account, that we always want to build it up And we always want that bank account to be, positive. And there are going to be experiences and there are going to be things out of your control in sometimes a training session that might make the training session or the target slightly negative. Some examples I can give you is like, training fish to a target. I wish I could just work with one fish in a closed space, but we have some exhibits that have, over 400 fish. So working with one individual can be really tricky, target training them. And often another fish that's more dominant will come in and steal the food or give the animal you're working with a bit of a hard time. And obviously that's going to make the targets a negative association for that animal. But as long
I have
as,
to ask a question
yes.
before you continue. Are we talking about your training? I don't know why, but these fish stories and training fish always
It's fun, eh?
I always find it very interesting to know how you deal with these situations. You've got a fish that you're busy training, and do you find that if there's any other fish that are inside that exhibit that have previously been trained in a similar way, they also want to be involved? And how does this get rectified? Because I'm just thinking, bird-wise again, if you're in an aviary with a lot of birds and they've all been trained, what we would do is we would station train each individual bird onto its own station so that we could make sure that those birds stay there while we work with one. You have a slightly different situation.
So I would need like 400 stations. Um,
That could be an interesting look on a glass window.
So maybe, you know what, I'll start now and maybe in like a few years' time, I'll have the training down. It becomes very overwhelming because it's not so much the fish that we've trained, it's the fish that we haven't trained, and there's the presence of food in the water. So as soon as you've got a food bag or you've got a container with food in, everybody wants to be your friend. Everyone wants to
Right, that
interact
makes
with you.
sense.
And
Mm.
often you will have a fish that you're working with. So one fish that I work with quite often is Pawpaw. She's a beautiful golden puffer fish. She's also only got one eye. So we all
She
have
looks like a pawpaw.
she looks like a pawpaw. And she will come over. We create like a peace sign with our fingers, and she comes over. That's basically her target. And she will come over to the target perfectly. And when you want to reinforce for her coming over, you've got a piece of food, and the bigger fish come in the way and they steal the food from you. So she gets pushed out the way. It becomes a bit of a negative experience for her. And then also the food that you were going to reinforce with is now gone. So what we've worked with that is really, it's in that exact example, I'm really not setting her up for success because there's so many opportunities where she's going to get ambushed by everybody else. So we'll always ensure now that when we're trying to feed her, we'll get her either over to the window because there's a barrier on that side. So she only has to kind of focus on the side that she can see with her one eye. And I can also kind of shelter her with my body against the window, or the same if there's like a rockwork area. We've had other pufferfish before. One that I worked with before was Lychee, and here I actually trained him to swim into a feed bag, and I could feed him in the feed bag, and he was completely protected. So it's also just looking at the situation and working out what you can do better to ensure that, when you are reinforcing, that animal is being reinforced accordingly. Your timing is, kept in time with the reinforcer. And then also just thinking how we can always improve. So also just, one thing I do a lot is always filming a training session, because you can pick up on a lot of things that are going on. When you're working with that one fish in a massive exhibit, it's also really difficult to see everything else that's going on. So there might be, a dominance display by larger fish at the back corner that also has interfered with that training. But because you're so focused on that one animal, you don't always see everything that's going on. So the more information we can get, the more we can kind of look at how we're training, and then always just reassess and improve so that animal is, having a positive experience with that situation.
Yeah, I like that idea of recording. did that quite a lot with training as well. But there's another, if this is a possibility and you have people available, also getting other trainers to watch the training session. Trainers are quite good at assessing other behaviors that are going on around, because your antecedent arrangements to try and make sure that you get the positive outcome during your training session, you can't always control certain external things, like you said, dominating displays that are happening behind the scenes at the back of the training session. And these type of things can affect the training, and you get what we call training blinkers on, because you're so focused on the animal that you're trying to train, and you focused on your target behavior that you're wanting, you don't really see what's going on around you. So yes, filming and having a potential other trainer watching, and they can then give you feedback either during or after the training to see how you can make it work better.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, what you can also do is also just, it depends on the exhibit. It depends on the layout. I'm very fortunate for the exhibit that I'm talking about in this example. We've got a dedicated medical pool, which is up at the surface. So what I've realized, the best thing to do is just target train the animals first as best as we can, taking into consideration everything that goes on. And then basically, as soon as they're comfortable with the target, training them to follow the target up into the medical pool, where we can then close the medical pool door and actually work with them off exhibit. Because then you can do a lot of training, because then you're working with that animal one-on-one. But again, that space needs to be made and kept a positive space so that the animal is always willing to go into there.
100%. I agree.
Yeah, and then I think just in general, it goes with all animal training. You just have to stay patient and you have to be consistent. Consistency is key. You can't decide that you're going to change things up halfway through and then you're going to go back to what you were doing. And it's something I've struggled with a lot, because I'm not always, at work. We obviously have different shifts and there's days that I'm off, and it means I need to ensure that the people that are taking over the training or the feeding are doing it as consistently as I would be doing it. So also just getting your team involved, chatting to them, providing them with resources is really important, so that you can all be on the same kind of page. And then also just having records, it's something we chatted about, but having records of where that animal's at and ensuring that your team knows where that animal's at, so that the same training steps are taken and they're kept at the same pace, versus someone coming in and, jumping a few steps ahead. And then, of course, the animal's going to get confused or frustrated. And when you are training, and if you have, moved on from the initial training and the animal has become very confident, and if you go into a training session and you see that the animal has kind of, gone a little bit backwards and is getting confused, it's really important that you just address that by going a few steps back. You have to go a few steps back to then move a few steps forward. So just catching that as well, and just understanding where that animal is at in that moment. Just because they were doing target training greatly 2 weeks ago, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be at the same standard, because there's stuff that happens that's not in our control, and you need to just meet that animal where they are at in the training session.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not always going to be exactly the same every single time. And yeah, there are factors that change the animal's behavior. It could be during the training, it could have been before the training, it could have been after your last training. A lot of things we don't have control over. So it's very important to just keep an eye on it. And yeah, straight back to, you don't have to go all the way down back to basics and start from scratch, but a couple of steps back, 1 or 2 steps back, just to get the flow back in and the animal rethinking about what it's having to do.
Yeah, and then I think, just if we're thinking about target training and all the applications we can use it, I think Ryan and I could probably just do a podcast just on target training and all the different uses. That's how, how valuable it is. But it's a lot of the time it's for, husbandry behaviors. So if you're needing an animal to shift into a medical space, like with our stingrays, and then using a target to get them to come over and, rest on a stretcher, for example, so we can do an ultrasound, or getting them to station or using a target and then stationing at that target so we can do ultrasound kind of desensitization, getting an animal to follow a target onto a scale so we can get regular weights. There's just like endless amounts of opportunities when it comes to target training that I hope everybody gets the opportunity to use and then experience, because once you've target trained something and you start using it, you start realizing how just so beneficial it is to have.
100%. I think target training is one of the best ways to start training because it gives you a baseline to work off of, and you can literally start really getting some really cool behaviors, and especially your medical behaviors like you mentioned, and shifting behaviors, and even target training can be used to get a stationing behavior. So it's very multifaceted that you use a target training to try and get most behaviors going, or getting them started.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about some of the animals that I've gotten to target train, I've always, when you read about target training, it really does depend on the species, but I think my expectation was always that it would take so long to target train an animal. But I mean, I've worked with some penguins that literally have learned to target train in literally a few training sessions. So within like 3 or 4 days, they understand what the word target means. They know what their target is. Same with stingrays. It's taken us, I think it took me about a week to target train some of our stingrays. So it's really something that can actually happen like overnight. It doesn't have to be a long process, but again, it comes back to being consistent, and again, timing is everything. What I do find is also very useful when it comes to target training, as we mentioned, with like a verbal cue like target, it can be really difficult to get it consistent. So then I would suggest maybe doing, for like a bridge, you could add a bridge in there. So you would say target, and then the animal would target to their target. And then often we are quite busy with our hands and we can't reinforce immediately. So then adding a bridge. So that would be something that basically bridges the gap between when the desired behavior was done and when the reinforcer is being delivered. So for the stingrays, because obviously some of them can they can actually, if they're close to the surface, they respond to like a dog whistle. But we can also use dog clickers underwater because it makes a clicking sound. So if you're working with animals that obviously aren't underwater, you can use a dog whistle. Works really well. And then that also allows the bridge and the reinforcing time to be really consistent across multiple staff if they all have a clicker or they all have a dog whistle, as long as that bridge is done on the correct time.
Timing is so important when it comes to your bridge. I've watched so many trainers get themselves into such a little pickle where they're not getting that bridge in the right place, and the animal becomes extremely confused as to, but you bridged there, so isn't that the behavior you wanted me to do? There's sometimes that little bit of delay can cause a problem. So the best thing to do is practice your bridging. So find something that's a repetitive thing that you can watch as it does it, and then click or blow the whistle on the moment that initial thing happens. And that's a good way to try and get your timing of your bridges, because not everybody can get it on the correct time.
I think also, just watching other training sessions with more experienced trainers, or there's so much on YouTube that you can find, going to watch training videos, you can pick up a lot from that as well. A story that I have about essentially station training penguins. We were asking them to come over, one particular penguin, we were asking him to come over to his station, which was a rock. And then from that station, we were working to get him to move from the rock off the exhibit so that we could move him more easily. But what we kept doing is we hadn't trained a bridge. So the penguin would come out, go to its station on the rock, and then we would use food as the reinforcer. So we'd give him a pilchard, but he would actually hold it in his beak and then would take the pilchard and then walk off. But as he was walking off, he would then only eat it. So even though we were giving him the pilchard, the thing that was kind of more reinforcing was him facing his nest or him walking back towards his nest. And looking at that through videos, and thankfully Gabby also helped me on that, was we noticed that we were actually reinforcing the behavior, him going back to his nest and not him moving out of his nest. So we were actually training the complete opposite thing of what we wanted him to do. And then what we started doing was we added a bridge, which was a dog whistle.
Right.
And then as soon as he was walking towards his rock out of the nest, and as soon as he got to his station and he was facing the gate that we wanted him to move out onto, we would bridge to tell him that's what we want you to do. So it's, speaking about timing, it's those small, tiny, like minuscule details that literally separate one behavior from a completely different behavior. And that's why I think we've said like 40 times that timing is everything.
It definitely is. It's so important. I've watched so many trainers get so frustrated because they say, but it keeps going to that other spot over there. And I'm like, but are you reinforcing for that? No, I'm not reinforcing for that. Yeah, but you might be bridging. But I'm not. And then we video it and they watch it again. They're like, oh, did I bridge there? Yes, you did. So again, it goes back to you saying record, because that also helps a younger trainer or a less experienced trainer for them to watch themselves. As much as most of us don't like watching ourselves or hearing our voices, we need to sort of watch ourselves to see where we're going wrong. And you don't always see it when you're in the midst of the training.
Yeah, I think, also if you are in a training session with an animal and you think, if you get to a point in your training session and you think, I don't understand, this animal keeps doing the wrong thing, it's most likely because you are doing the wrong thing. That's what I've learned. And then you have a good laugh at how silly you've been because you didn't actually think about what you were reinforcing. So if you ever get to that situation, just reassess, because I think there's never a time that the animal's done something wrong. It's always the trainer.
Yes. A good trainer blames themselves.
And the bridge.
That's going to be, yeah, and the bridge. Well, that's themselves.
My click is delayed, or my whistle didn't work properly.
Yes. I have a faulty whistle. We could talk about target training and training, I think, for hours on end.
We could. I'm like, do we have to stop?
I know, but I think we'll bore everybody.
It's been
good. So yes, if you guys have any questions about target training and you're unsure of anything, please reach out to us. We would really love to hear from you, and we are very happy to assist wherever we can. So if you're keen on emailing us, you can email us on animal.talk201@gmail.com. Send us a mail, maybe let us know what you're training, why you're training it, and if you've got any things that we may be able to help with, or maybe even discuss on the podcast at another stage. So yeah, please contact us. And we've got other platforms, don't we?
We've got all our social media. We basically everywhere. We're on YouTube, we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Our handle is Animal Talk Podcast _ZA. So you can reach out to us there. But also please go again, and if you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube, please go and subscribe, and also just go follow us on our social medias and help share our profile so that we can, as always, reach more keepers out there.
Definitely. Guys, if you don't subscribe, our viewers don't always get everything. So it's really important. The more people that subscribe, the more people that like, the more people that comment, it pushes our podcast out to a lot more people. And it really does help us get all the information out that we're trying to get out to help people, because there might be somebody out there that's never heard of something before. They hear our podcast and they get all excited, and we get another passionate person like our previous guest that we had. So it's really, really, really important to like, subscribe, comment, even share, share our content with anybody that you feel really could enjoy or benefit from our content. Anyway, remember that animals are our passion.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. And I think for just this episode, I can say that our quality of care and our training is their quality of life. Thanks for tuning in. Bye everyone.
Love it. Bye, everyone.
Our quality of care, training, bridging, timing, reinforcing,
All of the above.
stationing,
Please
mood,
see below. Kind regards.
financial support is their quality.
Exactly. Oh, goodness. Well, there we go. Done and dusted. Well done.
I think that was a good one.